On this episode of the Gwinnett Rambler, I thought I would share with you a book, an autobiography actually, written by my fourth great-grandfather, Amos Hadaway. He was one of the founding members of Hog Mountain Baptist Church, and in his later years wrote a book, although probably was not edited very well, that was published. I stumbled across this and thought you might enjoy his recollections. So, we'll get started. Sketches and Incidents in the Life of Elder Amos Hadaway of Flowery Branch, Georgia, together with sermons on the fallen angels and the figure of Pharaoh's horses and a circular letter to the churches written by himself. I'll make this small comment that I'm going to read as straight and directly as I can from his writings, so you'll definitely hear there'll be some challenges as he may not have had the best command of the English language at some times. Chapter 1. Parentage and Birth. My father, Thomas Hadaway, was born in Virginia, and when the Revolutionary War commenced, he was pressed into military service under command of General Greene, and served as a soldier during the war. He was in many skirmishes and fought in many a hard-fought battle. I can now well remember sitting on the old man's knee when but a small child, when the smoke from his pipe would go curling upward, and the tear from his eye would trickle downward, and I listened to him as he related the dreadful scenes of the war, the roaring of the cannons, the whistling of the balls, the shrieks of the dying, the moans of the wounded, the piles of the slain. While the earth was drenched with their blood, he would tell of that awful struggle until the cold chills would run over me. After the close of the war, he located in North Carolina, and sometime thereafter married Lavinda Morris, my mother, who was born in Maryland but was then living in Currituck County, North Carolina. They immigrated to Halifax County, North Carolina, with scarcely a knife and fork. My mother had 6 children, 4 sons and 2 daughters, Rebecca, Levi, Wilson and Willis, twin brothers, Polly, and myself. Rebecca married Thomas Head and was the mother of 17 children, no twins. 16 lived to be grown. She died in Morgan County, Georgia. Levi was twice married. His first wife was Sarah Garland. She had 2 children and died. His second wife was Isabel Lackey, who had 6 children. Levi died in Morgan County, Georgia. Wilson married Allie King, who had 1 child. Wilson died in 1812 in Taliaferro County, Georgia, a soldier of the Indian War of 1812-13. Willis died in North Carolina at about 4 years old. Polly, in Georgia, at 16 years old and weighed less than 20 pounds. She was diseased all her life with a fistidic cough. My father and brother Willis were both bitten by snakes, but both survived. Willis was bitten by a rattlesnake, and my father by a rattlesnake's pilot. Amos, the youngest of the 6 children, who is the subject of this narrative, was born in Halifax County, North Carolina, the 18th day of May, 1796, of poor parentage, as you have already noticed. I was made a cripple at my birth, and remained so until the present time, my left shoulder being dislocated in consequence of intoxicating drink. In that age of the world, there lived some women who were very officious, thinking their knowledge superior to all others, and in order to stimulate their skill and prepare them to act fearlessly and independently in this capacity, they must be supplied with a full portion of the good creature, alcohol. And while under its influence, they think they must perform some act, either good or bad, either for the benefit of the woman in charge or her offspring or their lasting ruin. And while under its stimulating influence, not having the fear of God nor the good of their fellow beings before their eyes, they are calculated to ruin both mother and child for life. In brackets, query. If 1/2 pint of alcohol can be the means of making 1 in every 6 a cripple for life, what will the product of 1 barrel of alcohol at the same proportion in a community? Let the thoughtful solve the problem. Close the bracket. Chapter 2. My father immigrated to Georgia in 1797 and settled in Wilkes County, and in 1798 moved to Hancock, now Baldwin County, 2 miles east of Milledgeville. In 1807, he moved back to Wilkes County, now Taliaferro County, not far from Crawfordville, and died there in 1812. I, being the youngest of 6 children, was left alone with my mother. Those of my brothers and sisters who still lived were married and had left the parental home. I, being crippled from my birth, as had already been stated, my parents, though poor, used what means they could to give me an education, but made a failure. Their opinion was that I would never be able to labor as others to make a living, and often would chide me for my carelessness in trying to learn, for I was very stupid in the matter. At the time, near 3/4 of a century ago, the common country school teachers were a kind of careless, lazy, idle sort of people, and by the way, too often drunkards. I, when a child, had been disgusted at seeing a school teacher sitting for 2/3 of the day fast asleep, when all shame had departed from him, and at the same time the schoolroom crowded with scholars. I made the above remark in order to bring up a small incident that occurred when I was a child, which has never been erased from my memory to the present day. The occurrence was this. One night my parents were talking to me about being so inattentive in my books and careless in learning. They said they had hoped I would have made some improvement, that I might be able to make a living by teaching. I told them I never intended to be a teacher. I looked upon them as being a class too low down for me to take one of them. They asked me what I expected to do, or how I thought I would make a living. I said that I intended to be a preacher, for I concluded that a preacher occupied the very highest station on earth. One other circumstance of note I will relate, which took place in my childhood. I had a sister at that time, the only one living. I suppose I was in some 9 or 10 years old. She professed a hope in Christ and was very pious, even as long as she lived. One evening, after I had returned home from school, I, as usual, was rambling about the place between sunset and dark. In going by a very thick plum orchard, I heard an unusual noise. I thought something like the voice of some person, and I resolved to know what it meant. I therefore made my way through the orchard until I got in sight of the object. I found it to be my sister on her knees, and just at that time I distinctly heard my name, and her ask to God to have mercy on me, and, if it was His pleasure, to grant my desire and that of making me a faithful minister of the gospel. I loved my sister, and she dearly loved me, which caused her to take considerable pains in giving me all the instruction she could. Her prayer was riveted in me, so that for many years, whenever I was inclined to go into wickedness, her prayer would be a check on my course. So through her influence and prayers, together with the pious instruction of my parents, I grew up to be a remarkably moral youth. I would keep out of all evil company, if possible, and was from a child inclined to associate with professors of religion. And as I grew up in my morality, I blazed out the path and stuck up the stakes for a Christian to follow, and I decided that there were very few, if any, to be found. I sometimes would single out one that was a Christian, if there were any such, but in watching them, for I was certain to watch them, I would soon see, as I thought, that they had missed the way I had laid out, for it was too perfect for finite beings to travel. I took a great deal of delight in getting up schemes to make professors go astray from what I thought was right, in order that I might be strengthened the more in my pharisaical principles. I was more particularly fond of the Methodists than any other denomination, although my parents were Baptist. I loved to be with the Methodists, and enjoyed their thoughts and their religious ways beyond any other people, particularly in singing and praying. I decided in my mind that if I ever made a profession of religion, I would join the Methodist Church. About this time, I became acquainted with 2 Methodists. Both were exhorters, and apparently very zealous. I became very intimate with them, and sought every convenient opportunity to be with them, and they too were extremely fond of my company, and no doubt thought that they would endorse me in their net. Some time not long thereafter, one of them joined the Baptist Church. I was present on the occasion, and heard him tell of his experience, and then I concluded he knew nothing about true and genuine religion. I then sought every opportunity to get him into difficulties, and sometimes I succeeded and then would laugh at him. I made this statement hoping it would be a stimulus to professors of religion to be guarded in their conversation and conduct before the world. At that time, a prayer meeting was held in the settlement, and had been for years. A few heads of families would meet every Tuesday night at their houses and hold their prayer meetings, and very often not a professor present that could read a hymn in the book. I attended them as much from curiosity as anything else. I had learned to read some few chapters in the New Testament, and they would call on me to read and give out the hymns for them. The boys of the settlement, together with myself, would often make sport of the prayer meeting, and to shame I say it, I would sometimes repeat or go through the exercise of their meetings, and sometimes we met at a watercourse, when I carried out in a formal way the act of baptizing. I then thought I had no immoral design index what I did, yet it was a sin. All right, that's chapters 1 and 2 from Sketches and Incidents in the Life of Elder Amos Hadaway of Flowery Branch, Georgia. And I'll continue at a later time with the other chapters. Hope you enjoyed them. Thank you very much for tuning in to the Gwinnett Rambler.